The northward shift may be caused by the storms passing over the mountains of Hispaniola, and David's previous west-northwest direction could resume after it crosses Cuba. But Dr. Neil Frank, the director of the National Hurricane Center, is concerned about steering currents, those high-altitude winds that move the storm.
I was mildly optimistic yesterday because there was no evidence that the steering currents were going to change, and it looked like the storm was going to stay just in south of Cuba and then go into the Gulf of Mexico. And I don't mean to wish any bad luck on Texas or someplace else like that, but it looked like that it was going to go on into the Gulf of Mexico. But with the indications today that those steering currents may be changing, that certainly heightens our concern here in Florida, and certainly it ought to heighten the concern up the east coast of the United States.
Last May, Newswatch aired a series of special reports called the Hurricane of '79, about a fictitious storm that slammed into the South Florida coast on Labor Day weekend. The series outlined the serious evacuation problems posed by 250,000 people living in immediate coastal areas, tied to the mainland by narrow, low-lying causeways. To make matters worse, half the population has never been through a major hurricane. It asked the question, how would people react? Well, people in public agencies seem to be responding. There's been a run on hurricane supplies, and in Tallahassee, state civil defense officials are gearing up as if Hurricane David was a foregone conclusion.
We're trying to get in a posture as soon as possible to be sure we have taken every possible step necessary to protect the citizens and be prepared to respond to any eventuality.
But are people becoming too edgy, too nervous? The storm is still 800 miles away.
I think it's a little bit too edgy if you really want to be honest about it, because I think people are going out and putting shutters up today, and that's not necessary. Now, if you haven't purchased shutters and you haven't built your shutters, maybe you need to do that today. But as far as going up and boarding up and taking things on the inside, no, it's much too early to do that. Most residents would only need 4 or 5 hours to prepare their house for a hurricane, and you can wait till Sunday in case this storm comes here, and we have to do that to take those kinds of actions.
Puerto Rico did not get the full blast of Hurricane David's strength. The tropical island was sideswiped by the killer storm. Nevertheless, the fringe brought torrential rains that flooded countless streets, and high winds contributed to loss of power in many towns. With David past, air service to and from San Juan resumed today. Passengers returning to Miami on an early morning Eastern flight were grateful for David's limited strike.
There's a lot of flooding right now.
How are people reacting to the aftermath?
Very calmly. Everything seems to be very well under control.
We waited it out. That's all we could do. It wasn't as bad as expected.
We didn't suffer much at Puerto Rico. We had a lot of winds, a lot of water, but that's about it. About 20 towns without electricity. We didn't suffer that much.
There's no question about that. The people were afraid of that.
The hope is Hurricane David will not follow them here. Ana Squi, Newswatch 10.
I'm Jim Reynolds in Fort Lauderdale. The hurricane may be a memory for the people who've arrived here from the South Atlantic. But for ham radio operator Eleanor of Fort Lauderdale, it's a night and day reality.
3 o'clock on Hurricane David from the National Weather Service in Miami. At 3 p.m., the center of Hurricane David was located.
Ellie's been working nearly around the clock since Tuesday, relaying the coordinates of Hurricane David to ships and islands in the path of the storm. The study in her home is jammed with radio gear. 15 years ago, she founded the Radio Amateurs Hurricane Network. In the past few days, her non-paying job has formed a lifeline of information to residents in isolated areas.
All commercial means of communication are down, like Dominica. The only word they have with the outside world is through ham radio. And there's one guy there that's been operating for about 2 days and 2 nights solid.
Ellie doesn't expect to get much sleep in the next several days. But if she can keep someone from getting hurt by the big storm, she knows staying up will be worth it. Jim Reynolds, Newswatch 10, Fort Lauderdale.
City employees and volunteers were busy on the phones at the Miami Beach Command Center this afternoon. Officials are calling for evacuation there, but only if conditions warrant. They have set up an emergency evacuation system. Metro buses will be dispatched to 11 pickup points.
There also was identified a substantial number of people that require special assistance, that might not be able to survive the ordeal of a Red Cross shelter on the mainland. And we have made special arrangements utilizing vans, buses, and special equipment, including ambulances, and probably will take most of those people that have been identified to the Theater of Performing Arts, where we can provide appropriate care, including some medical personnel.
Beach officials emphasize these are pickup points only. They are not shelters. Beach residents will be taken to shelters elsewhere.
In the Florida Keys, nobody knows what David has in mind, but a lot of people here know what hurricanes can do and are taking precautions. There is no panic. US 1, the road to the mainland, has only normal traffic, but it's clear that people are worried. In Marathon, many stores are boarding up. There's a run on gas stations. Some stations have run out of gas. This one reports it's doing 5 times its normal business.
They're gassing up in case, you know, the electric goes down or the hurricane, they're going to move out. A lot of them are going to move out tonight, you know.
Marathon's commercial fishing industry is also getting ready. Lobster traps are being tied down. Fishermen have already started moving their boats just in case.
My big one I want to carry it up Shark River. They say there's big high banks and mangroves that you can't even tell wind blowing there.
In Key West, Hurricane David is the topic of conversation. Some people here have decided not to wait for the Weather Bureau to tell them where David is going. They've already started taking precautions. All Air Florida flights from Key West to Miami are booked. A lot of people are making reservations to be safe, but are not showing up when they hear David is still far away. Plywood boards are at the airport, ready to be nailed into place if they're needed. People are stocking up to get ready for David if he should come.
I've got all my canned food stocked up. I've got candles. I've got everything that I can buy from the store and live for several days.
The Monroe County Civil Defense Department says the state is helping with preparations for David. According to Frank Hernandez, the department's chief, if the hurricane hits, the state will help provide enough food, fuel, and water to help the Keys survive. Richard Schlesinger, Newswatch 10.
The question being asked about Miami Beach tonight is, will this island be able to survive the possible onslaught of David? On one side of town, businessmen are still making last-minute preparations to minimize their losses. But across town, at this neighborhood dance, the mood is festive. The people here are almost oblivious to the word hurricane, and when you ask them if they'll follow any orders to evacuate, their answers are those most dreaded by civil defense officials.
I'm not afraid of a hurricane. I've been in one before.
We've been in half a dozen hurricanes.
Right. I wouldn't go out of my house.
You wouldn't? You live here on the beach?
Yes, on Collins Avenue.
And you wouldn't leave?
No.
Why not?
I think we are on 6th floor. We are safe.
While few here seem ready for a hurricane, Miami Beach city officials say they've been doing all they can to avoid tragedy. It's here at the Theater of the Performing Arts that hundreds of wheelchair-bound and bedridden elderly will be brought tomorrow if Hurricane David hits. But as you can see, the theater is empty. There's no sign that this place is ready to take on those people.
but the officials who will coordinate any evacuation say they're ready.
You're apprehensive.
A little bit, but I'm confident. I'm confident that we can do the job.
How could you be confident, though, if you've never done it before?
Because we've never let anyone down before.
At 8 tomorrow morning, Miami Beach fire and police officials will meet to finalize their hurricane disaster plan. But if David strikes tomorrow night, that will leave only 12 hours to move 4,000 invalids and clear out close to 90,000 more who live here. From Miami Beach, Joe Bergantino, Newswatch 10.
This is a very potentially serious hurricane. It's currently at 90 miles an hour. Anticipation is for intensification. The possibilities are that it's going to land someplace in the area from the Upper Keys to Palm Beach County at about daybreak tomorrow. That happens to also coincide with high tide, so we're anticipating surges in the 7 to 10 foot range above normal water height. So that creates the potential for some major flooding in the low-lying areas, and that's why we feel it's important to evacuate and do so before the front edge of the hurricane gets here, to do so during the daylight hours.
Side of the bridge.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a member of the Sheriff's Department here who is phoning it in direct. ARL is at ARS, and you are at Homestead EOC, is that correct?
That's affirmative.
Thank you, sir. We were looking all over for you. Glad you're aboard. This particular radio here are ham operators specifically. We are located in all of the county zone command posts. We have people right now in hospitals. We have someone at Parkway General Hospital. We have people on emergency power in Homestead Air Force Base, Cutler Ridge, South Dade Government Center, Hialeah Police Department. We will have someone at the International Airport and so forth. The network is growing. It's still early, but we will have radio amateurs just about in every strategic area in the county.
Hurricane David has yet to hit South Florida, but it has already created a major problem in the emergency room at Jackson Memorial Hospital. The facility is jammed, but not everyone there requires emergency care. The room is so packed that beds are being lined up in front of the main entrance.
We have a number of people who are panicking, and although they have no acute medical problem, they are coming to the emergency room for shelter. And we're encouraging individuals who do not have acute medical problems to go to their nearest shelter area.
Are you able to cope adequately, or are you finding that things are getting pretty stretched?
Things are getting very stretched. We're talking to individuals in the lobby area now, and those who can go to shelter areas, we are diverting them there.
There's another major influx at the county medical facility. Pregnant women are continuously arriving to check in. Doctors say they expect anywhere from 400 to 600 pregnant women before the storm fully moves in. Normally, the hospital sees 600 pregnant women a month.
There are some people who believe that as the barometric pressure drops, the difference between the barometric pressure and the pressure within the womb, that difference gets larger, and that may contribute partially towards setting or starting labor for that particular patient. The other factors are there are many people outside who probably are going to imminently deliver, and considering they may not be able to get to the hospital, as a precautionary measure, they're brought into the hospital. We're really talking about those at high risk as well as those who have indications that they are about to deliver.
The women urged to check in are those who are Jackson Clinic patients. These should be in their 9th month of pregnancy or in their 7th month and expecting twins or who are diabetic. They are advised to bring their medicine, a pillow, and blanket with them when they register. Jackson Memorial Hospital has set up several hundred cots for its staff during the hurricane. Some of the staff members are even bringing in their families for the duration. The fear, however, is what the situation will be after the storm passes. Joan Hall, Newswatch 10, Jackson Memorial Hospital.
Well, we've hung together here. I mean, it's a minor miracle that with the, we feel that we have about 2,000 people here. That with a handful of volunteers that we have there's a fantastic assistant principal here that really did a great coach job in getting the wheels rolling and getting the food going to the people that should have it. And we were employing anybody with 2 feet that could walk. We're happy that all the people have helped one another, because that's the only way that in this kind of times we can get through things.
We're at Edison Senior High School in northwest Miami. It's been open for use as a shelter since noon today, but until 3:30 this afternoon, only a few people had walked in. It was about then that Metro buses began unloading their first full loads of evacuees, most of them from Miami Beach. Within a half hour, more than 300 were on hand at Edison High, many of them elderly, who were being put up in a comfortable ground floor room.
We live in Collins Avenue. 16th, it's right opposite the ocean.
And this is your first hurricane?
Yeah, we've only been here since May.
As soon as we heard the warning this morning, that it turned into a warning, and that everybody who has single-story buildings or double-story buildings should evacuate, we went and we got in the car, my father and the children and I, and we went to the 36th Street, the high school there, and we drove all around, and the whole school was locked, and there was no one in sight. And then we waited with the busload of people, got stuck in the rain, and then we came here.
Many others, including the younger and active, and a number of young families, will spend the night in the Edison Gym. About 400 people, again mostly from Miami Beach, are now at Alapata Junior High School, where 2 Red Cross volunteers told us they were helping school personnel. However, officials at all the shelters we visited late this afternoon said they had no cots and no indication from the Red Cross when any cots would arrive. The evacuation plan appears to be working, however, via the radio-equipped Metro buses.
Destination be Miami Beach Convention Center.
Mr. Roberts, how many trips have you made?
8. 8 trips since this morning.
Full bus?
Full loads.
Any problems?
Yes, a lot of problems. The people are confused because they don't know where they're going. And they don't know whether or not there's food and water and proper facilities for them, and they put the pressure on me. I've had more of a problem in loading the people because they all staying on top of each other trying to get on.
There were about 600 people this afternoon at another shelter, Miami Jackson Senior High. They were being taken to the gymnasium. The mood there definitely upbeat. Youngsters were playing. There were some other diversions as well, such as card games, a chance to make some new friends. There was an awful lot of talking going on as everybody tried to get settled for what probably will be a very long night. Metro buses will continue to head for pickup points all along Miami Beach and will do so as long as weather conditions permit. Only a few people have yet driven to the shelters, but all of them have plenty of parking facilities if you need to park your car there. Those in charge at the shelters expect the tempo of arrivals will pick up this evening. Frank Lynn, Newswatch 10.
At 3 o'clock Sunday afternoon, Broward civil defense officials ordered the evacuation of low-lying and damage-prone areas in the county. Nearly 10,000 people filed to the shelters that had been opened up all over Broward. There were problems. At some shelters, the people who had promised to open the doors couldn't be found. That may have delayed the evacuation order by nearly an hour. Some people complained that the shelters were hot and there was a shortage of both food and medical attention. But most of the people I talked to leaving the shelters after the storm passed had kind words to say about their temporary home in the hurricane.
It was very nice. They gave us food, and it was real nice. Treated us nice.
They treated us very good. The food was fairly good, and not too comfortable, but you can't expect that much in a shelter. But they took care of us. We felt very safe.
What did you think of the shelter?
Well, it was all right. It's better. We were on the beach, we're on our honeymoon, and it was livable. We would rather be here than on the beach.
One of the big components in the plan was information. Sheriff's deputies took to the streets to make sure no one missed out on directions they needed to prepare for the storm. Most radio and television stations devoted most of their programming to the storm, and potentially life-saving information was there at the flick of a dial. Broward Civil Defense Director Art St. Amand said he's pleased with the way Broward handled the storm.
I am really pleased. We've had a chance here to see all of the county forces and the city municipal forces, put their full effort out. We prepared for it early on. We had enough time to do that. We've been able to address the county's needs and have people within the county structure and the citizens out in the community go through all of the things we've talked about so long. And we've urged them to review the things we've talked about, and we've urged them to get with this. I think we had a very good opportunity here for these people to show what they can do to prepare. They've responded pretty well to us.
Broward officials say they got off light in Hurricane David. The winds were not strong enough to call in police off the streets, and they could have responded quickly to emergency situations. But there weren't any major emergencies. One Broward official said the storm may not have been big enough to really test the county's capabilities.
Many Broward officials are uneasy, even though the winds are starting to die down. They're afraid that a lot of Broward residents now have the mistaken idea that they've been through a hurricane, that it wasn't much, and they don't have to take the next one seriously. And that may be the real tragedy in Hurricane David. Jim Reynolds, Newswatch 10, Fort Lauderdale.
Some Miamians decided safe harbor for their cars would be the Omni parking garage on Biscayne Boulevard. It was covered on high ground and fairly well protected from the gusty, gutsy winds howling outside over the bay. But we did not expect to find the garage as an annex to the hotel. For some, it was a free, dry refuge. Others stayed for the prospects of adventure.
See the hurricane when it comes through in the morning.
I think you have a good view.
It's the highest, safest place I can watch it. Better than being home. I live in Hialeah. I know that'll flood out.
Inside the Omni, Miami's newest luxury hotel, 1,000 out-of-town guests and about 500 locals packed the ballroom area. Managers were concerned the glass-enclosed hotel rooms would be too risky if debris shattered the windows. Luxury became no frills with free meals every few hours. For many South American guests, here for their summer shopping rituals, waiting for David was a new experience.
I believe that changing the name of the hurricanes into males probably has a little bit to do with women's lib or something like that. And it seems that the hurricane didn't like having a boy's name.
Just one of those trips out of town they will never forget. Patricia Sagan, Newswatch 10.
The town is still shuttered and shut down. Law enforcement authorities estimated that more than half the population evacuated this part of the Keys. All but a handful of businesses were closed by Saturday morning because their employees had gone north to escape the winds and sea. A National Guard medevac plane flew out 21 patients from Fisherman's Hospital early Sunday morning, taking them to South Miami Hospital. That evacuation, too, was triggered when the hospital staff began to leave.
We started our meetings last Wednesday morning and worked all through Wednesday and Thursday. And Friday at 7 o'clock in the evening, we decided that we couldn't predict what the storm was going to do, and we were concerned about the care of the patients in the hospital. Most of our RNs and technicians had decided to leave the Keys and go with their families to what they considered to be safer grounds up in the mainland.
So that you ran out of people to take care of patients?
It left us very short-staffed, and we felt that the best interests of the hospital, the community, and the patients that we had in the hospital was to transport them back up to South Miami, which South Miami Hospital was very cooperative with us and worked out arrangements for transporting our people from the airport to the hospital.
How difficult was it to find transportation for 21 bedridden patients?
It got pretty difficult there later on. When we started deliberating on Wednesday, it was very easy. Everybody was willing to commit, but when we got right down to push and shove Friday night, we were having a lot of difficulty getting a commitment for an airplane. Finally, the governor's office, Governor Graham, through whatever help he could get, finally got the National Guard, who was on location up at North Carolina, to come down with their C-130.
We wanted to ask people who evacuated if they were sorry they left, running up the coast with the storm instead of away from it. But there is still only a trickle of southbound cars on US 1, the only link to the mainland. That is the dilemma for people who live in the Florida Keys. If you're going to evacuate, you have to decide to do it early. Otherwise, you may not be able to get out. I'm Clarence Jones, Newswatch 10, at Marathon in the Florida Keys.
Three South Floridians died getting ready for the hurricane that never arrived. In Fort Lauderdale, a 71-year-old widow was fatally hit by a car as she crossed the street to enter the Red Cross shelter at Lauderdale High. A Miami warehouse foreman was electrocuted near the Card Sound Bridge in Monroe County. And a Hialeah man died of a heart attack as he was preparing his home for the storm. Those three were David's chief victims. Others were simply inconvenienced. At mid-afternoon, more than 50,000 Florida Power and Light customers in Dade and Broward were waiting for the company to restore power. Another 100,000 customers in Palm Beach, Martin, and St. Lucie counties were also waiting for the lights to go on. Wind toppled 400 wires here, but it could have been worse.
It's a sigh of relief, really. I thought maybe it would do more damage, and I was kind of worried.
The worst physical damage was here in Bal Harbor and in Surfside. For the past 2 years, the Army Corps of Engineers has been spending millions of dollars to rebuild this beach. David wiped some of it out. 25 feet of new beach was eroded overnight. The surfers didn't seem to mind, but officials say they lost $280,000 in new sand. Elsewhere along the coast, about the worst signs of damage we saw were uprooted trees. Buildings were still wearing their masking tape coverings, but beach residents were back on their perches. Nothing changed.
I went through a thing like that before, so I wasn't worried. And then I'm old enough to understand already that it's going to be okay.
Dade's public works officials say structural damages were so minimal that all buildings are still inhabitable. From the destruction David had left in the Caribbean, that is something to be relieved about. Patricia Sagan, Newswatch 10.
I'm Carl Zadell. This is the closest Hurricane David got to Broward County. Deerfield Beach, Broward's northernmost community, 8:30 a.m. Like a bully turned coward by Broward's fortifications of plywood, aluminum, and masking tape, David suddenly turned north, backing away from the battle Broward residents expected. Storm tides threatened, but as boats bobbed within inches of being dumped ashore, that threat too subsided. The worst damage we saw was on A1A on Fort Lauderdale Beach. Palm trees were stripped of sand protecting delicate roots or were toppled. Asphalt was undermined by belligerent surf. And the sand. Like a toddler rejoicing in newfound freedom, it was into everything. Tons of it. Dumped over retaining walls or running amuck where no wall restrained it, it made normally smooth A1A as bumpy as a country cowpath. Here and there, a tree blocked the road or a power line came down, but there was no really serious damage. Most residents we found had battened the hatches and bedded down for the storm. Bill Starr lives between the ocean and the intracoastal. He had taken all the necessary precautions and didn't regret it just because David turned out to be timid in Broward.
We were thankful that it wasn't as bad as it was before it hit Cuba.
See, you have your house all boarded up. If you had it to do over again, would you go ahead and board up again?
Yes, I think I would. It's better to be safe than sorry.
How do you think the authorities handled the storm?
Very well. I think we were all pretty well prepared due to their warnings.
You think you prepared properly for the hurricane?
Yes, sir. I've been here since 1953, and we've been through several of them. We didn't anticipate too much of a storm, and we didn't board up completely.
How do you think the authorities reacted to the storm?
I think they did a fine job. I think the media covered everything really, really swell and kept everybody well informed.
By afternoon, Broward shrugged away its apprehension and worry, and despite warnings of the danger, some people decided a dip in the ocean was in order. Would-be surfers who seldom get the chance to try got their chance. It wasn't Hawaii, but it wasn't Fort Lauderdale's usually placid ocean either. And it was time to heave to and clean up. Fort Lauderdale's Public Works Department attacked A1A. The toddling sand was put in its place, and the cowpath will soon be smooth again. David was gone. Though there was some talk of Hurricane Frederick, most people were too relieved to worry now. The people we talked to in Fort Lauderdale were happy with the decisions they made in getting through Hurricane David. Hindsight hadn't changed any minds. This was a great rehearsal, they said, and when the next hurricane comes, we'll be prepared. Carl Zadell, Newswatch 10, Fort Lauderdale.
People who live in the Florida Keys have resented the frequent criticism in recent years that they could not be ready if a major hurricane came, that a major storm in the Keys would become a national disaster. So for Hurricane David, they got ready days in advance. Early Friday, with David still hundreds of miles away, homeowners and businesses began boarding up, pulling their boats out of the water, tying them to stilt houses, or mooring them in sheltered canals. The movie Hurricane was supposed to play at the Marathon Theater, but it was canceled. Too many movie employees decided to hit the road. By Saturday at noon, the entire town was boarded up. Even the fast food places closed, primarily because there were not enough people left to run them. A Florida Highway Patrol plane cruised the islands late Saturday, and estimated 60% of the people had evacuated. Florida Highway Patrol Sergeant Gordon Stevens.
They have reacted very well. We've had no problems at all with the public or anyone here. I think everyone took, the advice that's been passed around, and those that were in trailers and what have you, they've already left. Our airplane was over the Keys this morning, and they said that looks like about 60% of the cars are even vacant from the homes in the area, so they've reacted very well.
The Salty Dog Restaurant and Bar was one of the few places still open for business Sunday. Manager Chip Chapman says he never leaves for hurricanes.
I've been down here since 1952. I've been through all the major hurricanes down here and never left the Keys. In fact, enjoyed the hurricanes. It's fun. It becomes a very democratic experience. Everybody is exactly the same.
Did you think about leaving?
For a while I did, then I decided I'd stay. I've never been through a hurricane before. And I thought I'd stay and try it and see if I'd done things right. I got it all buttoned up and I'm ready for it.
At first I was thinking of leaving, but when it...
What made you decide to stay?
I don't know. I couldn't make up my mind what to do, so I did nothing.
Can you go a little overboard about this business of preparing for hurricanes? Well, maybe. I'm Clarence Jones, Newswatch 10, at Marathon in the Florida Keys.
They kept coming last night through the wind and the rain, the warnings echoing in their ears: evacuate now, get quickly to safe shelter. Coral Gables High had reached its capacity by 9:30, including some Key West residents. Little Havana residents were the first to arrive at Miami Senior High, but then there were Anglos from all over town, and busloads of Miami Beach residents kept arriving there until almost midnight. County officials estimate 26,000 people sought safety at the shelters during the night. There were some very obvious problems. Some shelters were oversupplied with food. Others didn't have enough. One, Alapata Junior High, finally got its first food supply at 2 o'clock this morning. Badly needed volunteers also arrived at about the same time, saving what had been a difficult, oft-times chaotic situation.
We've hung together here. I mean, it's a minor miracle that with the we feel that we have about 2,000 people here, that with a handful of volunteers that we have there's a fantastic assistant principal here that really did a great coach job in getting the wheels rolling and getting the food going to the people that should have it. And we were employing anybody with 2 feet that could walk. We're happy that all the people have helped one another, because that's the only way that in this kind of times we can get through things.
When it became apparent Dade County had been spared a direct blow, those who had spent the night in the shelters, some sleeping soundly, others fitfully, and many not at all, each ready to go home. Waiting for the all clear from Civil Defense was frustrating and confusing this morning. The volunteers trying to handle the anxious crowd had a hard time getting their message across. Those with their own transportation can leave. Those needing buses must wait a little while. Was the night of discomfort worth it? Many thought so.
We got no sleep, but we didn't expect to, but we felt secure.
Safe and secure, that's all.
Okay.
Tough.
Wouldn't want to do it again? No way. Interesting, we met nice people.
Did you feel secure last night?
Pretty well.
And if you had to evacuate, would you evacuate again?
Yes, I sure will.
Okay.
More or less for my kids more than myself. It's a frightening experience, but what are you going to do?
The bus riders at Edison High Shelter poured out of the building when the first half-dozen MTA buses arrived. There were some shouts, some flying elbows in the rush to get aboard and head for home. County officials must face an unpleasant challenge. Will these same people be willing to do it all over again the next time we are threatened by a hurricane? Frank Lynn, Newswatch 10.
It was the 14th location in one day for this Florida Power and Light crew, a small apartment building in Hialeah, where residents had been waiting nearly 12 hours for light. The crew was the best sight of the day.
What can you do? I mean, you cannot watch TV, any report of the hurricane, whatever, you just don't know anything about it.
Now that we might get it back now, we don't even know. So it's been pretty hard. Myself, I haven't eaten yet.
30,000 Dade and Broward Power customers were still waiting for rescue crews. As people returned home from Red Cross shelters Monday, they discovered their power was off and added to Florida Power and Light's growing list of blacked out customers. Another 100,000 in Palm Beach, St. Lucie, and Martin counties are also in the same predicament. Crews will be working around the clock with extra manpower from Georgia, Alabama, and Tampa utilities. The company expects to finish the job in Dade and Broward by Tuesday afternoon, but can't predict how long it will take in the other counties. Patricia Sagan, Newswatch 10, Hialeah.
At 2 a.m., Miami was a city living underground. There was rain and gusts of wind of up to 50 miles an hour. You could have played canasta in the middle of Biscayne Boulevard and no one would have bothered you. There was life, but you had to knock on doors to find it. In a hospitality suite at the Coconut Grove Hotel, there was a hurricane party to celebrate what one participant called nature's way of hassling people.
My philosophy is you can go see a movie, you can go see a concert, you can buy anything you want, but you can't buy a hurricane. It's nature's giving it to you. And I was in the blizzard of '78 in Boston, and that was wild.
The streets were not totally deserted. There were people out and about, as we found out from this Miami police officer and his friend in the back seat.
Primarily, we're roving in the area because of the numerous B&Es that have been going on. That's burglaries. They've been hitting us pretty hard in this area with all the businesses being closed and not too many people on the streets. And this is generally a high-crime area anyhow, and they're taking advantage of the weather tonight.
In 2 hours of early morning cruising, we found two places of business open, a great Cuban restaurant in Little Havana and the Pussycat Theater, which was showing X-rated movies as usual.
Gonna stay open all night?
Well, as far as we know, until the power puts us out.
There's a hurricane coming.
I know it, sir.
There are people in there?
Oh, yeah, there's quite a few people in here. It's a safe building.
Steve Croft, Newswatch 10.
On any other Labor Day, Cranton Park Beach would be jammed with sunbathers and picnickers. But on this day, all we found were some brave souls ready for a breezy walk along the seashore and some folks curious about what the Fringe of David left behind.
Luckily, the predictions of disaster for Key Biscayne if Hurricane David had swept over it with full force didn't come true. So by early afternoon, with warnings lifted, residents of the Key who'd evacuated were homeward bound. They found one gas station pumping gas and one business readying to open its doors.
We're lucky. It's better for us. Nothing flooded out. That was the biggest worry. But we're going to be all right as long as Frederick stays away. We're coming back now from the hotel because it's no danger now, so we feel safe here.
They told us that everything was okay here.
If another hurricane comes, you're going to do the same thing?
Yes. I think it's wise to do it.
Also, guests who'd evacuated Key Biscayne hotels for shelter on the mainland began returning. Damage on the Key was minimal. Overnight winds that gusted to some 50 miles per hour partially sunk one motorboat tied up at Crandon Park Marina. Another boat owner had to pump water from his sailboat. The winds also knocked over a power pole with a bank of transformers. That left scores of Key homes without electricity. The biggest casualties on the Key were brittle and shallow-rooted sea grape trees. Many were uprooted, others had some branches that snapped. Crews this afternoon were already working to clear up that mess. For the humans, the threat of David served as a good lesson, but Metro officers found at least one Key resident, a frightened baby squirrel who wasn't grateful for the experience. Ana Ascui, Newswatch 10 on Key Biscayne.
The eye of Hurricane David passed within a few miles of Androstown. Hundreds of trees were uprooted, some were thrown into the streets. Roof coverings peeled off dozens of homes as 115-mile-an-hour winds whipped by. But the wind wasn't strong enough to tear off the roofs. 2 boats sank at the U.S. Navy testing center on the island. But there wasn't any loss of life on Andros or even any injuries in the area we visited. Reports of massive destruction simply weren't true. Residents say they were lucky.
Hurricane was sort of worse, but it wasn't all that bad. Destroyed a lot of trees in the area. Certain houses, a portion of the roof went off.
Some of the heaviest damage was at Small Hope Resort outside Androstown. But contrary to wire service stories, the resort was still standing. The ocean came over the beach, and there was 2 feet of seawater in these cottages. Small Hope's 200-foot pier disappeared in a wall of water. Owner Dick Birch stayed with the resort until the eye passed by.
Awe-inspiring, really awe-inspiring. It was pretty frightening. And we came down here as the last minute to check, and we were hoping and praying that we would not lose our pier, because it's very valuable to us. But at the time we were here, it was very close to when we think the eye just went slightly west of us. And it was obvious that we were going to lose it. And the wind, in the perhaps 25 minutes that we spent here, the water rose a foot right where we're standing right now while we were here. And so we decided to get out of here as quickly as possible.
It was into the buildings at that time.
It was running into the buildings and running beyond the buildings and back into the swash behind us.
The remarkable thing in all of this is that even though the trees came crashing down and the ocean came up and went through many of these buildings, no one was killed or injured in this section of the island. The people here say they're not leaving, they're going to rebuild and start their lives anew. Jim Reynolds, Newswatch 10, Andros Island in the Bahamas.
The storm began moving into Palm Beach County about 5 a.m., knocking out the power. By daybreak, the ocean was rising and winds gusted at 50 miles an hour. Palm Beach's exclusive Worth Avenue was deserted. A heavy old-fashioned street lamp was toppled over by the gale-force winds. The winds built gradually through the morning as the eye of Hurricane David edged its way towards land.
By noon, West Palm Beach was getting hurricane-force winds. The waves on Lake Worth were crashing over the seawall, and a large boat had slammed into the Flagler Memorial Bridge.
The winds were clocked at 90 miles an hour by a West Palm Beach TV station. Hurricane forecasters confirmed that the eye of the storm nudged onto shore at Singer Island, Riviera Beach, and in West Palm Beach about the time these pictures were taken. The storm tore apart awnings, screens, and shutters, downed traffic signals and uprooted trees. Construction work at a high-life fronton collapsed, but there was little in the way of serious property damage, and so far, no deaths or serious injuries have been reported. More than 6,000 people went to hurricane shelters in the West Palm Beach area. Some people had been at this one for nearly 24 hours.
Plenty of food,
supplies?
No, we don't have enough food. We didn't have any cuts, and we're running out of paper material.
Toilet paper?
Yes.
How many rolls do you have?
We just rounded up 3.
Edward Wilbur was in Jacksonville when he heard about the storm. Gusts of wind pushed his car off the road twice en route to West Palm Beach. When he arrived, his wife and family were already gone.
I don't know where my family is at.
You have no idea where they're at?
No, I haven't had. So I come in around and help the people. That's what I can do around.
David was not terribly impressive to people who have been through other hurricanes. Will Sanchez, age 102, had been through plenty others. He spent his time at the shelter telling stories and singing his favorite spiritual.
Through the storm, through the night. This ain't no storm. If it don't get no worse than this ain't nothing. I gotta stay at home if it ain't gonna get no worse than this.
A lot of people in South Florida share the sentiments of Will Sanchez. David was a minor storm by the time he reached Florida, having lost his teeth in the Dominican Republic. Hurricane forecasters and civil defense officials are concerned that the next time a major hurricane threatens the area, people may not take the threat seriously. Steve Croft, Newswatch 10 in West Palm Beach.
The storm passed to the west of the South Carolina coast, but in Charleston, high winds and heavy rains took their toll. People in Charleston spent today cleaning up. Power lines and telephone cables were blown down, low-lying areas flooded and were left a mess. But disaster officials said they expected it to be much worse. It was much worse. For one man in Charleston, David was quite literally a black cloud over his head. Edward Sessions and his family were on vacation last week. First, they went to the Virgin Islands. So did David. Then they went to Puerto Rico and met David again. They fled to Miami and last night tried to go home, to Charleston. Their plane was diverted because of the storm, and the Sessions had to drive through David to get to a home their nemesis had flooded.
I call him Sir David anymore. That's the only way I can put it. I didn't believe we'd ever get away. And then Frederick's right behind it, and we had to beat that out of Tortola. And it was terrible. In most instances, it was terrible.
People who live in Charleston have much the same attitude about David as people who live in Miami. The winds here were much worse than they were in Miami, but Charleston was spared David's full force. And one woman out for a morning stroll sounded relieved when she said it could have been much worse. Richard Schlesinger, Newswatch 10, Charleston, South Carolina. This is what a hurricane the force of Frederick can do to a town. Frederick was a force 3 hurricane on a scale of 1 to 5. It demolished a good portion of Mobile. Businesses were destroyed. A lot of people who live in mobile homes are now homeless. Dade and Broward had a close call with David a few weeks ago, but that storm was only half as powerful as Frederick. If Frederick had hit here, hurricane forecasters say it would have been a disaster.
Key Biscayne would have been inundated to a large extent, almost completely. Certainly waves would have washed across the island. The bridge, the causeway to Dauphin Island near Mobile was cut off. That would be analogous to, say, the Rickenbacker Causeway. So the Rickenbacker Causeway undoubtedly would have been underwater, probably would have been cut. The bridge would probably be out. Miami Beach would have been largely flooded. Downtown Miami would have been largely flooded.
The morning after Frederick came ashore here, Steve Olensky was keeping an eye on downtown Mobile as part of an informal civilian patrol. Olensky used to live in Palm Beach. He's seen hurricanes before in South Florida. They were not the same as Frederick.
This is the worst thing that I've ever seen. I mean, it's, I've never seen so much damage and destruction. It just wasn't like there's a lot of winds and stuff before, but nothing ever like this.
While the hurricane did a tremendous amount of property damage, Frederick didn't kill very many people. The people here say that's because they know what killer hurricanes can do, and they were prepared for this one. Evacuation went as smoothly in Mobile as it did for the most part in South Florida for David. Mobile is now trying to get back on its feet. Electricity is likely to be out for days. Looting is now a problem. Some shopkeepers have armed themselves, and there is a dusk-to-dawn curfew in effect. The homeless are starting from scratch now. Frederick was the first hurricane many had lived through, but once is enough.
Between me and you, I don't want to go through another one.